This is the latest in Ezekiel Kralen's chronicles of the two little dogs, Lucky and Flacco, and his love for them, and his manipulative, homeless friend, Deke. This is titled Janky Weed and White Trash BS, Ezekiel Kralen wrote. Email correspondence from December 10th to December 12th. Subject, the morning, wet and windy. Well, Watson, I wasn't the least perturbed over his latest cheap shot, as he did listen to all I had to say, and he was in a jovial mood. He actually grinned from ear to ear when I presented my promise about being there for him well beyond his life on the streets. But before standing back up and departing, I said one more thing. I think it's a great idea if you called into that radio show where they read my tales. I'm sure Marshall will be delighted to hear from you. I can talk to him and we'll set things up. Oh, no, don't bother, he retorted. I was in a bad mood when I brought that up. I don't want to come off like that over the air. You don't have to, Deke, I assured him, but you can speak your mind however you want. I won't be upset. He still turned down the offer. Okay, then, but if you ever change your mind, just let me know. I finished, and then stood up and returned once again to Hotel California North, where I deliberated upon our latest meet-up with immense satisfaction. Around 45 minutes later, he called up to my window, and when I saw him with a crazy black wig on that made him look like a cross between Saturday Night Live's unfrozen caveman lawyer and a troll doll, I let out a guffaw. No idea where he got that from, but you never know what you'll find in his cart if you dig deep enough. Bring down my stuff, I gotta go, he said as he grinned up at me. He also gave me 2 large bags of real shake and instructed me to pour it into a box and just let it sit for 2 or 3 days on my loft. Don't dry it off with a heater or do anything else to it. No sign of anger for my supposedly fucking up his bud stash. He was cool as a cucumber, smiling and at peace, in fact. So the box of shake is now parked on my loft, and I still wonder how he gets away with peddling such crappy product. My room continues to stink of janky Mary Jane, but I'm happy because if performing certain pointless errands, which he often has me do, is part of what helps get Deke to a better space, both head-wise and habitat-wise, I'm all for it. Though my bodhisattva premise suggests this is all scripted, that Deke is playing a role as a homeless person to put me through changes, not him, it is obvious to me he knows exactly what he's doing, takes excellent care of the doggies, and probably has a roof over his head all along. His radiant friendliness today implies all that, and more, that I am almost over this convoluted long path of trials, challenges, and worry. For his job is almost done, elevating my soul to a more enlightened and joyful dimension. Indeed, heaven and hell truly are a state of mind, as the Buddha once claimed. This premise also implies that my attorney's recent unwelcome surprise that my case could drag out for 3 years was to shock me into discovering more ways to rise above negative emotions, another guardian in my life, my newest, in fact. But I think the most delightful part of this meet-up was that several times Lucky dropped to the sidewalk on his back and began squirming with boundless glee and silly grunts, his way of saying how happy he always is to see me. And dear Flacco's warm affections, of course, gazing upon me with such kind regard and respect, it blows me away. How I wish I could provide these darling critters shelter from the storms, to see them on my cushy cot again, blissed out in doggy Dreamville, Lucky's stubby legs on his top side poking out because too short to reach the cot, and Flacco's Yoda ears pinned back like folded bat wings. They are angels. Subject, just more white trash BS. Again, Deke threatened me with violence by saying he'll have so-and-so beat me up, who was sitting just 3 feet away on the sidewalk and high on meth because I saw them share a bubble pipe earlier, and as expected, he also threatened I'll never see him or the dogs again, all because the pocket radio I returned to him after recharging it had a broken micro SD card that got stuck in the slot. Now, it wasn't broken when I handed it to him, and it's impossible to easily break the chip. Only a serious knock-up could do that, such as setting it precariously atop a mound of items in his cart, whereby it slides off and crashes onto the concrete, which is exactly what I think happened. But he decided to blame me. He had it for almost 2 hours before he waved it in my face and claimed I fucked it up. You probably sat on it, was his ridiculous accusation. No, I didn't. I'm always careful with your electronics. More likely you dropped it and decided to lay a guilt trip on me, I retorted. Why would I do that? Why would I make up such a story? He scowled. Because you have a wicked streak in you, was my blunt reply. I almost added that maybe he intentionally broke the chip to set me up, but I kept that thought to myself. I then went upstairs to pull the half chip out with the tweezers and insert a new one in with all his music on it. Dick tried to play the radio off the chip, but no dice. The slot must have been damaged as well. Everything else works fine on that radio, just not the chip. Well, at least he said it doesn't work, but he didn't give me a chance to check it out myself, so I remained dubious. It also has a USB port, so I decided to copy his rap songs onto a flash drive so he could use that. But I never got that far, since he continued to rail against me, so I told him this just cost him Thursday's allowance. I warned you, Deke, every time you threaten me with violence, I'll dock you $50, so no money till Sunday. I don't care, he hollered. Well, I sure do, I replied. He also called me a faggot and other stupid things, as well as claimed he didn't threaten violence. He then started screaming, "Get out of my face! Get out of my face!" I didn't, but just stood there and said, "Wow, Deke, so you're a scammer and a homophobic white trash punk. Tell me something I don't already know." Right at that point, the so-and-so sitting nearby piped up, "You should get out of his face." He's an elderly black fellow, tall and emaciated, been around the Castro for well over 20 years, totally placid and not too bright. I've seen Deke yell at him for no good reason once, maybe 6 years ago. I was across the street. His name is Derek. I first met him when he was friends with an alcoholic vagrant whose brother was a graphic comic artist on the East Coast. You might remember that chapter in my life and how he died in Davies Hospital, where the brother asked me via email to visit him there before he kicks the bucket, and I refused. "Please stay out of this, Derek," I said, while pointing at him where he still sat. "You have no idea what's going on." Of course he didn't, but obviously his addiction inspires him to side with his provider no matter what. "Don't feed his temper tantrums," I finished. Dick sort of grinned at that, and with bowed head gestured to Derek. "He's all right. He's all right." Of course I'm all right, Watson, but his unexpectedly calm reaction in my defense suggests this is just another scripted scene to test my mettle. And I sure hope that's the case and nothing truly serious. Fed up with his white trash bullshit, I declared, "I'm bringing your stuff down now." Upon returning and handing him his devices, I crouched down to pat the doggies, who were clearly concerned about me, what with that attentive look in their golden dachshund eyes. "Don't touch my dogs," Deke proclaimed. "Don't ever touch my dogs again." I ignored that order and continued to caress them with kind words for a little while longer, and then stood up and told them, "Just making sure they know they're loved, because you're doing a lousy job of it. You used to take better care of them, kept them in sweaters and fluffy blankets. Now you don't do any of that." Earlier in our meet-up today, I brought down a dense sheet of cardboard for the pups to rest on, along with a large thin blanket that Deke left behind a few days ago, since he refused to lay anything down for them in spite of the ample contents of his cart. Upon returning upstairs, while Deke was bagging around 3 pounds of shake he collected the night before and had spread over a large sheet of cardboard right there by the bus stop, I decided to also return his damp, stinky load of other shake that I had stashed for him in a large open box so it would cure over several days. I dumped it in a trash bag, sealed it with a double knot, stepped back outside, and dropped it by his feet. "What's this?" he inquired. "It's the shake you asked me to hold on to," I replied. "That's how you stored it, in a trash bag?" he queried. "I don't appreciate that." "No, I had it spread out over 2 large plastic box covers that I used for trays and set them near the window for sunlight," I calmly explained. "I'm returning it because I don't appreciate your threats and false accusations, and if you don't leave really soon, I'll call the cops." Interesting that he didn't argue with me this time around when I returned the soggy ganja. And he did move along a few minutes later. I also want to note that when I said he screamed and hollered, it was nowhere near the top of his lungs or as ridiculously dramatic like past hissy fits of 3 and more months ago. I've noticed his more recent tantrums have been relatively subdued by comparison, surely an improvement and possibly a scripted plot anyway. But I don't like this white trash aspect of his personality, since those are the kind of people I choose to stay far away from, but I guess you can't avoid it when it comes to homeless outreach. Now for a hopeful part of my latest Deke update. Before all this horse hockey came down, and when Deke had first shown up today, I heard the pups bark and looked out the window. They walked right below my window without stopping and continued on to the corner where they finally parked. Deke looked up toward me and gestured with a wave of his hand to not come out. I nodded okay and pulled my head back inside because I remembered he said he's to meet his shelter advocates this morning, right at that spot. But after 20 minutes or so, he called me down to hand me his devices for a recharge. He told me that tiny house offer was no longer available. It may take 2 or 3 months more to get him indoors. I told him I'm sorry to hear that. And just when I did, those 2 advocates showed up in orange vests and a badge to identify their outreach group. I stood by quietly while they talked to him, a black man and woman. The chap gave me a radiant smile, exposing his lack of teeth, which I could easily appreciate. I grinned back with a knowing look. They were kind folks, told him to hang in there. We'll get you a place soon enough, and then walked up Market Street to continue their rounds. So that's great to see, Watson, that Deke really is working on getting a roof over his head. It's not just fake talk, though I'm sad to realize the Brindlekin will have to live through an entire cold, rainy season before they have a real home. Not making any excuses for his nasty behavior later today, but I suspect his temper tantrum has something to do with his disappointing outcome, with this disappointing outcome re the tiny house. But what, me worry? No way am I going to let any of his trickster antics wear me down or ruin my day, nor will I twist myself into an angst-ridden pretzel over the pups remaining outdoors for a while longer. I am being tested. Just more white trash BS? Watson wrote, oh, so exasperating and exhausting. Fucking meth heads. That shit brings out the worst in people who are already fucked up. I replied, I'm not so sure about that, but we've discussed the pros and cons before. Deke comes from a rough background. Watson wrote, the meet-up with the outreach people was a real grace note, very civilized, the way they come to the street to meet the street people they're trying to help instead of requiring them to come into a fluorescent-lit office. I replied, though a brief visit, I was impressed. Watson wrote, so it seems like they will allow him to have the dogs. Niet? That seems too good to be true, but I pray that it is. I replied, yes, if a homeless person has a pet or two, they'll allow for that. Watson wrote, how you hold up under the torrent of abuse, ingratitude, threats, and insults he heaps on you is a real wonder to me. I replied, the troubled people outreach workers deal with day in, day out, not to mention your own trials caring for your mother in her last years, make my situation come off like a walk in the park on a sunny spring day. Besides which, Flacco and Lucky's boundless compassion inspires me like you wouldn't believe. I can't afford to wallow in hurt. It does no good to anyone. Thanks to the wisdom of my bodhisattva premise, I know now that one can turn any crisis into a win-win outcome for all parties involved. You just got to sail through whatever rough seas come your way. The sunlight shall break through once all challenges have been met, all lessons learned. Schmaltzy but true. Hero's journey and all that rot.